Welcome back to part 10 of our 20-part explainer series. Look, as medical coding professionals, we absolutely know that the devil is in the details, right? We've all stared down those frustrating denials that just completely stall out the revenue cycle. Well, today we're going to fix exactly that. We're diving right back into the crucial world of X modifiers, zeroing in on XP and XU. But before we get to the good stuff, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Decode Healthcare with Harshal. Seriously, your support is what lets us keep building these deep dive explainers for you. So let's just get right into it. Today is all about mastering modifiers XP and XU. Now, you probably remember from our previous explainers that Medicare rolled out these X modifiers as highly specific alternatives to the dreaded modifier 59. Why? Well, because 59 was essentially being used as this giant catch-all to bypass edits, and it brought down heavy scrutiny. You put a 59 on a claim and auditor radar goes straight up. So using these X modifiers correctly, that's your absolute best defense. It proves, without a doubt, that you know exactly why a service is distinct. All right, let's start by sharpening a really powerful tool in our coding toolkit, Modifier XP. This stands for Separate Practitioner. The official guidelines are pretty crystal clear here. You use this modifier when a service is distinct for one specific reason. It was performed by a totally different practitioner. Think of it as a laser-focused subset of Modifier 59. It's built precisely for those scenarios where multiple, distinct specialists are delivering completely separate services to the same patient on the exact same day. It's basically flashing a giant neon sign to the payer, saying that a completely different expert stepped in here. But, and this is a big but, there's a really strict dividing line for when to use XP and, more importantly, when to keep it far away from your claim. You use it when different physicians or qualified healthcare pros provide distinct care on the same date. Simple enough, right? But here is the major audit-triggering trap. You cannot, I repeat, cannot use Modifier XP if the practitioners are in the same group and billing under the exact same NPI. No way. Also, it's definitely not for team members collaborating on the exact same procedure. For XP to work, the services themselves have to be truly distinct, independent actions. Let's actually ground this in the real world with two quick scenarios straight from our source guide. Scenario 1. You've got a patient who undergoes cataract surgery by an ophthalmologist. Cool. But then, on the exact same day, a plastic surgeon steps in and performs an eyelid repair. Boom! You drop an XP on there to show the payer these are distinct services handled by totally different practitioners. Scenario 2. A patient is in the hospital, they get evaluated by a cardiologist for a heart issue, and then separately by a nephrologist for a renal issue on the exact same day. Each specialist bills their evaluation code, slaps on the XP modifier, and instantly clarifies their separate expertise. Easy peasy. Okay, moving right along, let's transition over to what I consider the trickiest of the bunch, Modifier XU. This one stands for Unusual Non-Overlapping Service. The official definition tells us that a service is distinct because it does not overlap the usual components of the main service. Out of all four X modifiers, this is hands down the most specific and frankly the most heavily restricted subset of Modifier 59. You are reserving this strictly for unique, non-overlapping characteristics of a service that go way. The absolute key here is respecting the super strict boundaries for XU. You use XU only when XE for a separate encounter, XS for a separate structure, and XP for a separate practitioner just flat out do not apply. It is quite literally your modifier of last resort. Because of that, you must never ever use XU for standard bundled components or routine combinations. If those services are normally bundled together by coding edits and they aren't truly unusual for that specific encounter, keep XU off the table. Using it as a clever workaround, that is a guaranteed red flag for auditors. Actually, I really need you to lean in and hear this next part. Modifier XU carries an incredibly high audit risk. Why? Because that word unusual demands the most bulletproof, detailed justification you can possibly provide. You can't just toss XU on a claim as a convenient catch-all. You need exceptional documentation explaining exactly why that secondary service is distinct and how it absolutely does not overlap with the standard components of the primary service. I'm talking about a crystal clear clinical rationale. Without that paper trail, yeah, you're just not going to survive an audit. All right, get your screenshot fingers ready because here is your ultimate X modifier cheat sheet to tie everything we've talked about together. To bypass those edits compliantly, you need absolute precision. So use XE when the distinction is a totally separate patient encounter on the same day. Use XS when you're dealing with a completely separate anatomical organ or structure. Use XP like we broke down today for distinct services by different practitioners. And finally, keep XU locked away for unusual non-overlapping services when those other three just don't fit the bill. Master these four, and you'll drastically peg down your reliance on Modifier 59.
Relying on Modifier 59 as a crutch is definitely a habit of the past. Precision is the future here, folks. By properly deploying XP and XU, you are essentially building an audit-proof shield around your revenue cycle. So that wraps up our deep dive into the X modifiers. But wait, what actually happens when you perform the exact same procedure twice on the same day? Like, how do you prove it wasn't just a clumsy billing error? Well, that is exactly what we're going to tackle in part 11 of this explainer series when we break down modifiers 76 and 77 for repeat procedures. Until then, keep striving for clean claims, and I'll see you next time.